The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, signed a bill into law back in May prohibiting tech companies from censoring speech. The courts, a federal district court, recently weighed in on the constitutionality of that bill. Let's find out what they said. Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. First of all, Ron DeSantis is a quickly rising figure in the Republican Party, the conservative circles. A lot of the popularity that he's currently experiencing is in part due to his response to the pandemic. The steps he took, which, opened up the, Florida quicker, and he wasn't really a fan of the lockdowns. So this has really increased his popularity amongst Republican and conservative circles. But let's talk about the bill that he signed into law. The law, Senate Bill 7072, allowed people to sue internet companies that censored speech based on political or what they consider political ideology. It also prohibited tech companies from deplatforming candidates for office, allowing the government to fine them different amounts, whether it's a local or statewide candidate. A lot of people criticized this law, saying this law itself was a violation of the First Amendment. Of course, this was a response from DeSantis to things like Donald Trump being taken off of several social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. His argument is that the censorship from Silicon Valley was designed to silence conservatives. There's a couple of things he and some other prominent Republicans said when signing this law. Let's take a look at them. This session, we took action to ensure that we, the people, real Floridians across the Sunshine State, are guaranteed protection against the Silicon Valley elites. Many in our state have experienced censorship and other tyrannical behavior firsthand in Cuba and Venezuela. If big tech censors enforce rules inconsistently to discriminate in favor of the dominant Silicon Valley ideology, they will now be held accountable. That was from Ron DeSantis. His lieutenant governor, Jeanette Nunez, said, "What we've been seeing across the U.S. is an effort to silence, intimidate, and wipe out dissenting voices by leftist media and big corporations. Today, by signing SB 7072 into law, Florida is taking back the virtual public square as a place where misinformation and ideas can flow freely. Many of our constituents know the dangers of being silenced or have been silenced themselves under communist rule. Thankfully, in Florida, we have a governor that fights against big tech oligarchs that contrive, manipulate, and censor if you voice views that run contrary to their radical leftist narrative." An interesting thing about this law is that it has an exemption for any company, social media company or platform that owns a theme park within Florida. Curious why you would have to make an exemption for Disney, considering that Disney has a lot of tourism dollars going into Florida. It's almost as if, as government sometimes is accused of doing, you're picking winners and losers and you're allowing other interests to influence legislation. I've often argued concerning the claims that big tech is censoring conservatives and libertarians, that whether or not, this is actually a violation of our free speech. And my argument is, no, it's not. If these are private companies, they have the ability to choose who they allow on and who they kick off of their platforms. So now people may say, but they're huge and their reach is widespread. And I'm like, okay, well, what is stopping us, regardless of who we are, regardless of what our opinions are, what is stopping us from creating a similar platform? Parler exists. There are other social media companies that exist that appear to be independent of this big tech boogeyman that many are preaching about. But the question is that realistic? Because people will say, but if we start our own company, it's still not as big as Facebook. And to them, my question is, why does that matter? If your company isn't as big as Facebook, it's your job to make it as big as Facebook. And that's it. Like, you have the opportunity. Because it almost seems what you're arguing for isn't for the equality of the opportunity to start your social media company, but for the equality of the outcome of having a hugely successful social media company. Like, are you really making that argument? Because that's what it sounds like to me and a lot of other people. Ultimately, I think it's up to any individual to use or don't use any particular social media company And if you don't like it, then stop using it. You see, if conservatives in mass, for example, Donald Trump got 75 million votes. If those 75 million people decided, we don't want to use Twitter, we don't want to use Facebook, we want to use Parler, we want to use MeWe, that option exists for them. The fact that they don't may suggest that these other companies aren't doing it as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or the big social media companies that exist. But that's just my opinion. What did the court say? This week, a federal district court ruled on the matter. Not ultimately, but in terms of a preliminary injunction filed against the government and this law. The federal judge ruled that the preliminary injunction would be granted, meaning that Florida cannot enforce the law for the time being. The matter isn't finished, but for the time being, that law has been ruled likely to be unconstitutional, and so Florida cannot enforce the law pending the outcome of this case. Now, will they appeal the preliminary injunction, or will they just allow the case to finish and determine whether or not the law is found constitutional or not? That I'm not sure of. My thought is, even if this is appealed, Florida government, the Senate, the law will be still found to be likely unconstitutional, and the preliminary injunction will stand. That's my prediction. Let me just read to you a portion of this case and this decision by the Florida District Court. The legislation now at issue was an effort to rein in social media providers deemed too large and too liberal. Balancing the exchange of ideas among private speakers is not a legitimate governmental interest. And even aside from the actual motivation for this legislation, it is plainly content-based and subject to strict scrutiny. It is also subject to strict scrutiny because it discriminates on its face among otherwise identical speakers between social media providers that do or do not meet the legislation's size requirements and or are not common ownership with a theme park. The legislation does not survive strict scrutiny. Parts also are expressly preempted by federal law. Ultimately, it comes down to this. The First Amendment applies to the government, not to private companies. So when the government, even the government that may be advocating a viewpoint you like, says, oh, a private company must allow this speech. A private company must not prohibit people that are saying this. That is the violation of the First Amendment, not the company's decision to pick and choose who it allows on its platform. The response that we as users or potential users of social media have is not to use any particular social media platform that doesn't agree with our sensibilities. We have a choice. We do not get to use the government to enforce our choice on others or on that company because we don't like what they do. If you don't like what the social media companies are doing, if you don't like what YouTube is doing, if you don't like what Twitter or Facebook is doing, start your own social media. Donald Trump started his own blog, and it fizzled and failed. That is the choice that you have. But just because you have the choice to start your own thing is no guarantee that your thing will succeed. You have to put in the work to make it something that people want to use and participate in. That's what freedom is about. As always, if you enjoy this content, hit the like button, subscribe. This is what I do. I talk about issues, not just from a Team Red or Team Blue. I don't do that. But ultimately, if you agree with me, you can hit the subscribe button. You can hit the like button. If you disagree with me, feel free to hit the dislike button. But don't just disagree and run away. Hit the disagree button, hit the dislike button, and tell me why in the comment section below so I can address it either in a future video or in the comment section. I'll see you next time.